Preparation for a bushfire happens long before the fire arrives. You need to understand your risk on your property, the history of fires in the area, and have your property well prepared long before the fire arrives. What we're about to see is some of the ways you can improve your home's bushfire resilience. I said last weekend that since the fires, I've been all over the state, north to south, east to west, and around here is the worst damage to vegetation I've seen. Just because the wind's coming from the northwest doesn't mean that's the way the fire's going to go. If it gets to a gully and suddenly, oh, there's an opportunity to go shooting up there, that's what it'll do. And despite the wind direction, that's where it'll go. And the gullies then increase the speed of the wind just because of the way they're shaped. Here's this fabulous gully that if the wind was blowing the right way, we'd get a funneling of wind coming up here, and it works the other way too. They can go down gullies and have a magnified effect. You can see it around here, not just BAL, but Clarence and Dargan. You can see where the trees have really been hammered and they're dead and they're not coming back. And usually that's where the gullies are. General rule, fires are more benign going downhill than uphill. So this is upslope. We don't need as much protection on this side, but we still account for the fact that a fire might come down the hill here and still have protection. So something to keep in mind, that even though the fire's over there, we know it's coming from there, but gee, it could come from anywhere. The height of the charring on this side, you can see is there. And on this side, it goes up to pretty much the fork. So there's a really big difference between each side. What does that mean? Nah, counterintuitive again. It came that way.
Create the same vortex.
A vortex behind the tree. Okay. So the wind was coming this way, created a vortex that sort of enhanced the fire to run up the back of the trunk. We ignore how high it is on that side, it doesn't really mean anything. But this side is important. The fire was that high on this side. So it was a fairly small fire trickling through here. When you go looking around, you'll see different heights, and some of the horrible places, it's black the whole way. So we know we're looking at a canopy fire. When I do my assessment, I assess how much radiant heat is going to impact on the building. And that's dependent on the vegetation, the type of vegetation, and the slope under the vegetation. And I can do calculations to work that out. If the bush is so close to the house that I can also work out the length of the flames, which I can, and work out that the house is going to be directly impacted by flame, not just heat, we call it flame zone. And then below that are different bushfire attack levels, they call them, 40, 29, 19, 12.5 and low. Each of those levels has a corresponding construction standard. The only aim of the standard is to provide you with a house that will give you shelter long enough to survive the front of the bushfire. And then it's going to burn down, possibly.
Just ask something about radiant heat. Say if the hanging swamp is blazing away, how much distance before, the intensity, the intensity of the radiant heat will drop over a distance?
So there's a calculation for it.
So if it was blazing away here, this would be a great risk. Down there, not as much risk.
Not as much, yeah.
I mean...
And the way we counter that is the distance of the APZ, the cleared area.
Okay, that's what I needed to know.
Typically we do it, if we say that white gum there is the edge of the heath, I'll do a map of the radiant heat contours in different levels. So right up next to it will be flame zone, then for another 5 metres it'll be BAL 40. I'll explain what 40 means in a sec. 29 and gradually decreasing towards the house.
What is the risk to a human being right close? Do you just pass out and then a bit further you mightn't?
So when I talk about those numbers, 40, 29, that equates to the number of kilowatts per square metre. So a kilowatt is a 1 bar heater, electric heater. So you imagine BAL 40 is 40 of those in a 1 square metre box. that's going to be extremely uncomfortable. You can't stand next to it. I'm aiming to get this house as safe as possible. So that's the lowest BAL rating as possible. But there's constraints in that we can't clear infinitely. If you're more than 100 metres away from the bush, your BAL rating will be BAL low. But clearing 100 metres of bush is a big thing. And these days, if you do that, you run into all sorts of other problems that if you clear too much a proportion of your land, you're then required to offset the clearing you've done by either buying biodiversity credits or offsetting other land on your property and saying that will never be cleared. So there's all sorts of problems. I just measured this and I think it's about 20 to 22 degrees slope, which is pretty steep. That's a problem in itself. So if this was a building now, a building application now and we're putting it in, anything more than 18 degrees, I have to have a geotech study. And that study hopefully will show that we can achieve the APZ standards without the whole lot sliding down the hill. Another acronym you might hear is APZ, which stands for Asset Protection Zone. That's the area cleared around your home to protect you from radiant heat and flame impact. The APZ isn't necessarily a completely cleared area. You can have trees, you can have shrubs, but there's a limit on how many. APZs, perfect. It's got shrubs, got trees in it. What do we think about this area here?
There's not much on the ground. They'll run through it.
Overly concerned.
No, it's still an APZ.
Yeah, it's not good.
It doesn't have to look like a park. Not that there's anything wrong with parks. This is still okay. It's managed.
Yes.
Yeah, you've got to keep an eye on it. And there's things growing here that in a couple of years are going to get taller, and then you start getting selective about what you keep and what you get rid of. This area here is starting to get to the stage where, no, I don't like it. You can see that looks very different to that. We've got a lot of build-up of material on the ground. APZ doesn't have to be manicured to within an inch of its life. This area, if we ignore the accumulation of stuff like
that's from the wood chippers.
yeah, shooting it there. This is pretty close to the spec for an APZ. If we get to the nitty-gritty, the canopy is meant to be separated by at least 2 metres.
Let's look that one out.
I'm not so concerned about it here because we've got a bit of a separation over there. This is a clump.
Yeah.
But like I say, an APZ doesn't have to be a green desert. It can look like this. This accumulation around the base, yeah, I'm not happy about that. Yeah. Generally, shrubs you can have 10% of the area can be shrubs, and the rest grass. And the grass has to be maintained at less than 100 millimetres high for the distance that's been specified for the APZ. You've all heard about crown fires and maybe even seen them up here where the fire's going through the canopy of the trees. That can't happen if there's no fuel below or very little fuel. So the idea of an APZ and the fact that you can have trees in an APZ, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people, is that the ground is managed, the landscape's managed underneath. So if you have minimal grass height and shrubs managed right down to the ground, you won't get the canopy fire. So what would happen here, if we did that and managed the understory, say 50 metres out, the crown fire would come up, get to that section where we started managing, and very quickly stop. It would taper off into the managed section, and we get rid of the crown fire. Yes, it would be nice if it's possible in these trees to separate the canopies so that the opportunity for the fire to burn through the canopy continuously from down the bottom all the way up to here would be sort of diminished. Yeah, it's 2 to 5 metres gap between the canopies.
Can we do that? Can we just go in and do that?
Well, like I say, it depends on the conditions of consent. Take out the ones that don't meet your criteria that I'm about to give you. And the criteria is we're trying to retain the view, obviously.
Yeah.
So we don't want them to grow any higher than that. They're down there. But we also want to stop the wind coming up this gully.
Yeah.
So break them up, select the ones that are going to give you a bit of a pattern through there that's a wall of canopy. The only catch with that about the trees is we don't want the canopies touching. So you're picking the ones that are separated. So the big advantage that we found here yesterday was a few more trees might slow the wind speed down. Those trees will slow the wind speed coming down of a fire coming up towards the house, and they'll also hopefully trap embers before they get to the house.
But having the odd tree within, like Canopy said, is
Mhm.
not going to necessarily increase the BAL rating.
No, and I've been encouraging people in the last few weekends to put trees in their asset protection zone to protect yourself from the wind.
Yeah.
So not only does the trees slow the wind speed down, if they had canopies on them, and we're a lot of canopy down here, but they also catch embers. They catch the embers down there before they get to the house. So if you design it properly.
Since all those trees just below here, we had them taken down by the council and the EPA on that program a couple of years ago. Since those trees have come down, and again, there's 14, 15 trees were cut down just below this ridge. The wind coming up to the house is unbelievable.
Yeah.
There's no barrier now.
Yeah.
It just rattles the windows.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
And that wind is promoting the fire to come up the hill. There's nothing to slow it down. It's dragging the embers up with it. Next thing it hits is not the canopy, but the house. So.
One of the things I do like about Mary's property is there's a good row of trees over the back there.
Yeah, she mentioned that earlier about.
And those trees slow the wind down and catch the embers.
Mhm.
A lot of people think trees are their enemy and they want to chop them all down.
No, I don't want to do that.
Oh.
And if you've got well-placed trees, they actually can protect your property.
So Mary told me earlier that there used to be a
Just
pine forest.
Across there was a pine forest, and I didn't get very much wind here at all. But since they've taken it, it's all been burnt. And I notice a lot more wind here now than I did previously.
So Mary's place is pretty clear around it. It doesn't completely 100% meet the specs, the criteria that we're given for an asset protection zone. Where it falls down on that is the number of trees and the separation between the canopies. I'm not too concerned about that because we've got almost zero understory, and you need that understory for the fire to get up into the canopy. And proof's in the pudding. I've got an aerial image here of January 2020, and you can see the bush up the back here, which hadn't been managed, burnt, and the canopy all burnt. But what happened down the front here, it burnt through, obviously. You can see the charring on the trunks, but it didn't burn in the canopy down here, and probably protected the house across the road. This was catching embers. So it did its job. So Henrik was just asking about, should you leave the vegetation? If you whip a snip, mow the vegetation, should you leave it on the ground? Yes. So you're slowing down the water flow across the land. You're stopping the impact of rain directly on the soil. That's a good thing to do. The other thing is if you're taking out trees or saplings, you leave them there as well and lay them across the slope. So they're a physical barrier to the water running down the hill. So you can be a bit clever about it and minimise the effects of the erosion. Over years, there's years of seed bank there, and they never grew because the light couldn't get through because of the canopy. Now they've got all the light in the world, and that's our problem. That's why we're getting so much regrowth, because there's no canopy shading out the understory.
My place was absolutely, like, it was cleared completely when we first went there, and now you can see it's got trees that big that have been burnt.
Yeah.
They just like kaboom.
So the post-fire, it's the perfect condition for that seed bank to take off. There's an ash bed, which is a fertiliser. It's got light. Then we had the rain.
Yeah.
Happy days. The plants are loving it. Yeah. So it's coming back, and that's its only job in life, is to grow back. So if we cut it down, it's going to grow back. If you kept on doing that, eventually you would break the cycle of the seed bank and they'd stop growing back. But that's a big job. And how far do you go? The only long-term solution I can suggest, and you might not like it, is you just have to live with it. And eventually that will grow up, it will thin itself out, we'll get a canopy back, and it'll stop the understory from growing as thick as it is.
Yep.
And it'll get back to a natural balance. Might take 10, 15, 20, 30 years. In the meantime, we've got a problem. We've got a fire hazard. What I am seeing is a lot of fuel on the ground, and that's what happens. So over time, the fuel builds up and builds up. You take an overall view of the fuel load, and it'll get to, for that vegetation community, a maximum fuel load. When we get to that point, things start to happen. We've got that much fuel on the ground that new seedlings are struggling to grow through that. So the forest and the ecosystem survives by disturbance. You need disturbance. Now, whether that's somebody physically going in there or a natural process like fire is a great example of disturbance, or animals with the lyrebirds, or one tree goes over in a storm and disturbs that little bit of environment, that makes a big change. You're now getting light coming in and all sorts of things are happening. If you don't get that disturbance, what happens is you get a thing called senescence, where you're not getting regeneration and the older plants are getting to the end of their life, dying and not being replaced. And you can see that in here, a lot of these dead twiggy things in here, just getting to the end of their life and they're not being replaced. We've got these big areas here of fuel on the ground with lots of litter and dead material, but fairly sparse regeneration. And you can see the difference between this and other areas where the fire went through, and we did get that disturbance, massive disturbance in some cases, or it's massive regrowth. You can't walk through it. So this needs a fire. It's as simple as that. Doesn't need to be a massive fire, just a fire to go through and burn some of the ground layer to get that disturbance, regenerate the ecosystem, and it'll come back to full health again. Let's say that Rosalind only bought this house yesterday. She moves in, she knows that you should be doing something for bushfire. What is she supposed to do? So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go to the council website and they have a thing called the DA tracker. And you can go back and search for your property and find all the approvals. And hopefully you'll find the original DA approval document. And in that it'll say what the bushfire conditions were. You should have an APZ of 40, 50, 60 metres. You should have a house built to this construction standard and you know what you're meant to do. So does everybody know about the 1050 code? Yes. Yeah. You just got to, before you use it though, you have to make sure you go to the website and check that you're in an appropriate area for it. Just because you're in a bushfire prone area doesn't mean it applies to you. And there's other criteria about heritage, threatened species, slope. Let's say that the 1050 code doesn't apply to you and you do want to clear for an asset protection zone, or you do want to remove trees around the house. The council said, no, we don't want you to do that. What are your options? You go to the Fire Control Centre or to the website and apply for a hazard reduction certificate and say what you want to do. I want to remove these 3 trees around the house and I want to clear 25 metres out from my house as an asset protection zone. Doesn't cost you anything. They will assess it and give you a yes or no. If they say yes, they'll give you a certificate saying go for your life, do it. And it's an environmental approval, a legal approval to do the work. It will override the council. Override it? Yeah. What we do in the planning and the assessment is try to get a combination of measures. So don't just rely on the APZ. The APZ falls down because you still get ember attack. It doesn't protect you from that. We try to get the construction standard right, but don't rely just on that. We also have the APZ with the construction standard. This is the Bible that I work off. It's called Planning for Bushfire Protection. You can download a copy of that. It's based mostly on the Australian standard. You can't download a copy of that, but Karen might just have a copy of it. So this is put out by the RFS. It's legislation, or it's legislated. These are the conditions you have to build. And in this one, we get things like access and water supply, those sort of conditions that might be put on your house. How much water you have to provide for firefighting, your access to the house. If you're more than 200 metres away from the main road, for example, you need a second way out. Access to your property for firefighters and their vehicles is vital. If they can't enter your property and exit safely, they can't help protect your home. But access is a big thing. When I assess the house, I have to look at what access we have. If you're more than 200 metres from the road, if you were building up the back of your block, you would have to have a second way out.
Do I need to make that gateway wider? And yes.
I would.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a good investment. You don't have to make it
Oh,
much
it's not
wider.
hard.
You can just get a half gate. That half gate would have been enough for me to get a cat one in. And I wouldn't be scared to bring a cat one in here because I can see that it's well cleared.
Yeah.
You know, even though it's only one way out, there are a couple of trees there, but they don't worry me too much at all because you'll see them burning anyway. The other major killer for firefighters is limbs dropping down, but again, you're not too close to the house, so yeah, I'd bring a crew in here very confidently, but I'd stop at the gate.
Okay.
I turn up with a fire crew and we're protecting this house. I want nice, easy, quick access all around the house.
Yeah.
I've got it down the side and the back, that's fantastic. But can you imagine trying to drag hoses and do stuff here in the front?
It's also in the dark. I've tripped over that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's stump behind it.
So that's something to consider. Make life easy for the fire brigade. But there's one really simple thing that I reckon you could do that would dramatically improve your chances of saving the house. A number out the front. The benefits carry on. So when you fall off the roof and call the ambulance, you don't want them driving up and down for 10 minutes trying to find a place. If you'd like more information, go to the RFS website or the Association of BAL, Clarence and Dargan website, which are on the screen now. We hope you all have a safe journey through this bushfire summer.